On my way now to get the COVID-19 vaccine. I'm certainly looking forward to it. I have some kind of interesting emotions that maybe I'll talk about a little bit later. Certainly feeling grateful for the opportunity. Before I get into my own personal story of getting vaccinated, I want to go ahead and try to quickly explain what this vaccine is using styrofoam balls, toothpicks, and Play-Doh. Let's get started. Okay, why don't we first talk about coronavirus and specifically COVID-19 and what makes that unique. So if you look here, represented by styrofoam balls and orange plastic toothpicks, this is COVID virus. These viruses are very small. They're able to go into our individual cells, and that's how they replicate and reproduce themselves. This virus in particular is interesting because it has on it, as you can see here represented by orange plastic toothpicks, a spike protein. These spike proteins are unique to COVID-19, and that's important to remember as we start talking about the vaccine. Now, this, as I'm sure you can all tell, is one of our body's cells that we talked about. Okay, so if we cut that in half, you would actually find two important structures. One being the nucleus over here, which contains the DNA, as you can see by my double helix Play-Doh DNA strands. And the other thing you'd see over here is what's called ribosomes. This area, the nucleus, which contains the DNA, is really kind of what you think about the crown jewel of the cell. That's where all the main information is located and stored. These areas, called ribosomes, are what I think of as factories of the cell. So they take information and they basically put these proteins together and they actually build whatever it is that you want them to build. They're awesome little factories that just sit inside of our cell, waiting for information on what they should be making. Now, when we are infected by a virus, what that virus does is it comes floating along here. It's got these nice little spikes on it, and it actually goes inside our body's cells, and it sits there inside the cell. Eventually, it finds its way to the ribosomes. It then attaches to those ribosomes and basically says, hey, I want to make more of me. The ribosomes, being the functional factories that they are, start producing more and more and more of the virus. Eventually, once these viruses are created from the ribosomes, they are released out of our body's cells and go into the rest of our body to then infect other cells and repeat the process. Okay, now that we've talked about how viral infections work, let's talk briefly about how vaccinations work. Okay, the whole point of a vaccination is to give your body's immune system some type of exposure to an infection. And that way your body's able to build up an immunity to that infection before actually ever getting infected. And so that way, if you're out in the community or wherever it may be, you get exposed to that type of infection, your body already has an immunity built up, it's able to kill that, and you actually never even have symptoms, never even realize that you were infected. Now let's move specifically to the COVID vaccine. The interesting thing about the COVID vaccine is that it's an mRNA vaccination. Okay, that's the first time that an mRNA has been used to create a vaccine. However, that technology has been around since the 1990s. mRNA actually stands for messenger RNA, and what it does is it carries a specific message about COVID to our body's cells, specifically to the ribosomes. Let's look back inside the cell. With the mRNA vaccine, our body is actually only receiving information regarding these spike proteins. Now keep in mind, we are only sending a message to our body's cells. We are not actually sending a piece of the actual spike protein, so it will not cause us to get the infection. Okay, so if we let this represent the message that's being sent to our body's cells, we can see here how this message basically comes into our cells, goes to the ribosomes, and it speaks to the ribosomes and says, I want to reproduce more of this spike protein. The ribosomes then say, okay, that sounds great, let me get to work. And it produces more and more and more of the spike proteins. These proteins are then allowed to go on the outside of our body's cells and express themselves. Now, if you can imagine the S protein being expressed on the outside of our body's cells, assuming that this styrofoam ball here is our body's cells and that these orange toothpicks are the S protein, you can see what that may look like. Now, once this S protein is expressed on the outside of our body's cells, our immune system comes along, in this instance, oddly in the shape of a purple Pac-Man.
It recognizes the S protein as something that is not supposed to be there and begins to attack it.
Once our immune system begins to recognize these S proteins, it begins to develop a defense system to fight against them. And over a period of days to weeks, we begin to develop more and more and more
immune cells,
which then allows our body to not only recognize, but then fight off any COVID-19 infection that we come across in the future. On my way now to get the COVID-19 vaccine, feeling grateful for the opportunity. All right, I'm here. I'm gonna go in and get this vaccine, and I'll let you know how it goes.
There you are.
Awesome. Thank you. Did it. We got it done. As far as the vaccine goes itself, I didn't feel any different than from my flu shot. I haven't grown a third arm yet. I still only have 2 eyes and I don't have a tail. I think that's all good news. All right, good luck.